Thank you. And thanks for the organizers for the kind invitation. I share Matteo's feeling. It's a great pleasure to be here because I've always been interested in the relevance of Feyerabend's thinking and Feyerabend's philosophy for current debates. And I'm sure you've understood or realized by now that Feyerabend was you know, he was quite provocative, polemic, and sometimes also very unsystematic in his writing and his reasoning, and that gave him a somewhat marginalized position in the philosophy of science for many years. And I've always been interested: can we draw out something useful, something helpful for current context out of this, so to speak, unsystematic polemic mess that that Feyerabend confronts us with. So I'm here not to give a talk, but also to learn. And obviously, we'll have a great opportunity this afternoon to hear and discuss the relevance, the potential relevance of Feyerabend's ideas for the current transition in the High Atlas. And I already learned a lot this morning from Kenneth's talks in the Feyerabend in the context of decolonization. So this is all really important and really exciting for me. So thanks for having me. All right. So what I will do, as I said, so current relevance, I will now again go back to some things that Matteo has already touched upon. Feyerabend's pluralism, his theoretical pluralism, and I'll try, to give you in the first part a very short overview on the development of his pluralism, taking up some things that, Matteo also already mentioned. Then I'll contextualize this pluralism, this time for the context of how we dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic. I have a couple of papers on this, so I'll briefly present those. And then I'll end with a few remarks of, the potential relevance for the transition in the High Atlas. I should say I'll do this in an uncritical way. Okay, so many things that I'll present to you today, should be and can be looked at in a much more critical fashion than we do today. Okay, so this is a summary, simplified, and also a charitable summary towards finance. Okay, so Matteo has already talked about the development of Feyerabend. I will not say much about this. What's important here for my purposes is that we start out, so to speak, with a philosopher that is concerned with science, with epistemology, that engages with his contemporaries, with the positions in philosophy of science of the time. And then in that context developed what is usually referred to as his theoretical pluralism. And then over time, this idea of pluralism gets, so to speak, broadened and extended way beyond science. He kind of produces a very general, almost a general view of reality of life out of this idea of pluralism. Where very early on, he connects pluralism with what he calls humanitarianism, that it's not just, a position in the philosophy of science, it's almost, a normative ethical position. Okay, so very generally speaking, we can see this development from a, so to speak, science internal philosophical position towards a broader, external and even, political and of course, 1978 is not the end. The story goes on, but that's just by ways of context. All right, so now I'll focus on the early phase, the early development of Feyerabend's theoretical pluralism. And I think a good point to start is the letters that Feyerabend wrote to Thomas Kuhn in the early 1960s. Emmanuel has mentioned them already. So in 1961, Feyerabend was among a handful of people who received a copy of a manuscript of Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and he wrote 4 extensive letters with detailed comments on the manuscript, and the letters contain a very multifaceted critique of Kuhn's account in Structure or in the manuscript, and in particular of Kuhn's notion of normal science. And I argue, I think this critique, so to speak, forms the basis for what would then become his early theoretical pluralism. Now, very briefly, Thomas Kuhn, something's going on here, I hope you can see it, all right? Very briefly, Thomas Kuhn's structure of scientific revolutions, like probably one of, arguably one of the most important contributions to Western philosophy in the 20th century, certainly to the philosophy of science. Very briefly, what's the idea of Kuhn? Kuhn provides a model for scientific change, for the development of science. So the idea is, most of the time, science or scientific disciplines are in what Kuhn calls a normal phase, normal science, what he calls normal science. Normal science is defined by what Kuhn calls a paradigm. A paradigm in a normal scientific phase provides, so to speak, the theoretical framework in which scientists approach problems. The paradigm also tells you what might be interesting problems to solve, and it also shows you what possible problem solutions are within, a scientific discipline. So the paradigm kind of sets the rules of the game for a discipline, right? And then this is the idea of Kuhn, okay? So then it's not that we must look at the development of science or of scientific disciplines not just as something continuous, and cumulative, but as something that is that is punctuated by revolutions, okay? Sometimes, within a paradigm, within the disciplines, when all the problems within the paradigm have been solved and only so-called anomalies remain, the discipline might go into a revolutionary phase, And in a revolutionary phase, so to speak, the rules of the games are changed totally. We have a fundamental change of paradigm, and we end up, so to speak, with a new paradigm and so to speak, new rules of the game. So that's Kuhn in a nutshell. And now Feyerabend takes aim at this model, and specifically he criticizes this notion of normal science in Kuhn. Okay? Because in Kuhn, normal science has an element of dogmatism. It's something monolithic and monistic. Okay? And this is what Feyerabend didn't like. Right? So that's, so to speak, the core of his criticism of Kuhn in this early letters. And then, out of this criticism, he develops an alternative to this monistic view that Kuhn has, this monistic idea of normal science, which is based on the idea of proliferation and something that has been called in the literature anomaly importation, all right? So this is a very simple summary, okay? So imagine that if we look at a theory, so if we look at an established theory through the glasses, so to speak, of an alternative theory, new relevant facts might become available. Okay, so that's what Matteo also mentioned. So the alternative is important to make certain facts visible that wouldn't be visible if we were just looking at reality through the glasses of the established theory T. Then, should we decide to replace the established theory T by this new theory, this alternative, it is because this new theory explains certain facts that the old theory was unable to explain, and it also shows why the old theory failed to explain them. And according to Feyerabend, we then end up with a better theory, and ipso facto with scientific progress. Right? So therefore, theory proliferation is essential for progress in Feyerabend. Very simply put. And you can, so to speak, cook up out of this idea something like a recipe that Feyerabend would give you if you want to follow the idea of theoretical pluralism. If actually revolutions are your goal, if you want to trigger revolution, if you want to have scientific progress, what you should do according to Feyerabend is this. So you should actively develop theoretical alternatives to established theories. Then you should describe the facts that are relevant for the theory from the perspective of the alternatives. So you can see it's all about changes of theoretical perspectives here. And then, if you're lucky, certain facts may now, so that is, if they are described from the alternative perspective, appear as anomalies for the established theories, because suddenly you have a different kind of looking at the facts through the alternative framework. And this is what has been called in the literature an anomaly import. So you've, so to speak, through the availability of the alternative, you have created, so to speak, an anomaly for the established theory, and now a revolution and progress, change is more likely. Right? So, we've heard about this. I don't want to say too much about this. So there are different ingredients to this theoretical pluralism, if you want to look at it historically from the history of science. So there's, one should also mention, of course, Popper's influence here. Then we haven't talked about this, but there's a strong influence of John Stuart Mill on this idea of pluralism and Feyerabend. And then you have what I just presented to you, this criticism of Kuhn's notion of functional argument for normal science, and out of this you get this epistemic pluralism that is characterized by this idea of proliferation and anomaly import. All right, so this very briefly in a nutshell. Now, if you want to, so to speak, summarize this in a systematic way, again, what are the key ingredients? They're gone now. So it's anarchy at the end of the day again. I haven't memorized my slides, so I need them. I'm completely lost. I don't know what these 4 elements are. But now I can't go. Thank you. Great. All right. So, a systematic summary, the key ingredients of this idea of epistemic or theoretical pluralism is, on the one hand, the idea of fallibilism, then, as I pointed out, the importance of alternatives, proliferation, again, and then, and this is something we've also talked about already, of course, in Feyerabend, the alternatives are not just scientific alternatives, so we're not looking at just at alternative scientific theories, but these alternatives might also come from, so to speak, non-scientific forms of knowledge. So any alternative, in a way, according to Feyerabend, can have the capacity, so to speak, to highlight deficiencies in your preferred way of looking at reality. What are these 4 ingredients? Fallibilism, of course, it's the idea that it's reasonable and also epistemically virtuous to take a fallibilist stance towards even the most successful and broadly accepted approaches, scientific or otherwise. Every approach, while it might be useful to describe and explain, predict certain aspects of reality, is likely to fail in the description and explanation and prediction of other aspects, right? So that's the idea of fallibilism. Nothing is, so to speak, absolute. Importance of alternatives. Alternative approaches can reveal shortcomings in established methods and theories by unearthing, so that's the crucial idea, unearthing and highlighting problems which would remain invisible in absence of the alternatives. And then this this idea of science transcending pluralism, extra scientific forms of knowledge constitute an important correctives to a strictly scientific perspective. Okay, so it's, so to speak, this corrective function of the contrast between alternative ways of theorizing or looking at reality is again important here. These extra scientific perspectives can provide important insights into aspects of reality that remain invisible from the perspective of scientific worldview. And because these aspects may be highly relevant for the lives of people, they should be considered in policy making. Matteo also talked about this. So now with this kind of systematic summary, we've used this in a series of paper, me and my colleague Simon Lose, to apply it to some of the debates in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so to speak, we've used this Feyerabendian toolbox to generate arguments for pluralism in the context of COVID-19 policies. And then you end up with something like this. You could say, well, a multitude of methodologies and theoretical alternatives can help to highlight the shortcomings of each alternative. So in the context of COVID, you can think of modeling strategies, using different modeling strategies, SIR models, agent-based modeling, network modeling. They're all important, so to speak. Don't stick just with one modeling strategy when you try to model an epidemiology, for example. And in situations where scientific results, that is, in this case, model projections, have a direct influence of policy, which was obviously the case in COVID-19, uncovering the epistemic deficiencies is crucially important, right? We have to know where and in which ways our scientific approaches fail, when we're trying to use science to solve important societal problems. And then again, non-biomedical perspectives produce different types of evidence. So think of the social sciences, for example, even the humanities in those contexts, and they make certain phenomena visible. So they're important for policy. Again, social sciences I mentioned already. And then also, this is specific about Feyerabend, you can, produce arguments for science external pluralism. Okay? So it's not just, the natural sciences and the social sciences and the humanities, but even other forms of knowledge, since these can also help to detect relevant phenomena as well as unintended negative consequences of policies. Local knowledge is relevant for the design, implementation, and assessment of policies in the context of COVID-19. Think, for instance, of the knowledge of local educators, school teachers, what happens, if we close down the schools and what's going on there, okay? This is not strictly scientific knowledge. It doesn't satisfy the standards of scientific evidence, but it might still, give you important insights of what what kind of policy should be pursued. Again, this was just a brief summary of, what we've done in this series of papers and using Feyerabend, so to speak, to argue for pluralism in policymaking in the context of COVID-19. Now, to end very briefly, I can't say very much here, okay? Because as I said, I'm here to learn, and obviously, we will talk more about this this afternoon. But just some thoughts on my part, to what extent pluralism might be relevant. This kind of Feyerabendian pluralism might be relevant in the transition, in the ongoing transition in the High Atlas right now. So what you can certainly say, looking at Feyerabend, is that an overemphasis on science-based rebuilding strategy should be avoided. So that's, so to speak, an exclusive focus on earthquake-safe reconstruction, which doesn't mean, obviously, that this is not important for Feyerabend, okay? It's just this exclusive science-based approach is probably something that he would criticize. Any form of epistemic paternalism should be avoided. I think this is along the lines of some of the things that Kenneth has talked about. And non-scientific voices and local forms of knowledge obviously should be fully recognized in the planning of reconstructions, for example, of educational infrastructure, but again, that's just an idea. Reconstruction efforts should take into account the cultural identities of local populations, obviously. And in general, in a nutshell, I think what you could say from a Feyerabendian perspective is that the plurality of different forms of knowledge should be acknowledged to begin with. Okay? So there's more than scientific knowledge that we can use when we try to solve, so to speak, actual real-world problems. Thank you very much.